Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, to the channel IT Simplified. I hope you find the videos useful and subscribing to my channel. In today's video, I'm here to talk about what are the different options available when it comes to deploying SQL database in Azure. Because what I'm saying is that there is a lot of confusion in the community of what are these options, which one to choose from, and understandably, when you go to the pricing calculator, it can get really confusing. And that is the objective today, is that by the end of the session, hopefully you will have a better understanding of how it is priced, what are the differences, and what are the things to keep in mind in choosing between one over the other. Okay, so let's get started. In order to explain this, I'm going to use my whiteboard because when you can see visually, I think it is much more easier to correlate. So let me just go to the whiteboard and let's see what are the different options available. So when we talk about SQL Server on Azure, there are two basically model. One is SQL IS. You're talking about Azure here. And the second option is SQL PaaS, or you will also come across database as a service too. So platform as service or database as a service or SQL infrastructure as a service. So let's look at both these options and what you need to keep in mind in order to choose one over the other. So the simpler option is the SQL infrastructure as a service. So as we all know that when we talk about any of the public cloud, we don't have any access to the physical infrastructure. So we are talking about VM. So I'm talking about here SQL VM, right? And for how long this machine will be running within the platform, you'll be charged according to that. If you have on-prem SQL licensing with software assurance, you can take benefit of hybrid, right? Hybrid licensing or software assurance, and there is a significant amount of saving. If you're starting out fresh, the pricing of the licensing of SQL VM, whether it's standard, enterprise, or web, whichever you choose from, will be blended in the compute for you. So that is what SQL VM. The only thing that you need to keep in mind when we talk about SQL Server, from the high availability point of view, because a lot of applications are dependent on that, we are talking about availability sets. So if you're not familiar with the availability set, in simple terms, it's deploying your servers or your VMs in pairs. So in case one goes down, the other is always up and running, and you're responsible for backing up, make patches, making it highly available. So all those will be your responsibility. But the plus point is that you will have better control over your infrastructure. So I know that a lot of applications, they need access to the operating system. So if you stand or come under that category, then SQL IaaS will be your option. And obviously, you need to be knowledgeable about the SQL because you'll be managing everything. From high availability point of view, you don't need to do your backups and all those kind of stuff which is associated. So I think that's pretty straightforward, at least from the pricing point of view, the IES model. And actually, when we go and finish this all these scenario, I'm going to go to the pricing calculator and show you that too. The confusion start when we talk about platform as a service or database as a service. So when we talk about platform as a service, you'll come across three options. You will have single database, I'll call it single DB. You have elastic pool, and then you have manage instances. And we'll look into this one by one because that's where so much confusion. Okay, so when we talk about single database and elastic pool, there are two purchasing model. You will have DTU and then you have vCore. And just to be specific, DTU and vCore is for single database. For Elastic Pool, it's going to be eDTU or Elastic Database Transactional Unit and vCore. And a lot of questions they ask, what the heck is DTUs? And we don't understand what is vCore, right? So database transactional unit, to keep it simple, is a combination of your compute power, CPU, RAM, the storage, what kind of storage it is used with the IOPS and throughputs, and vCore is also same thing, is a CPU, RAM, storage, depending upon what class you choose. But the important thing, two purchasing model, you have database transactional unit and then you have a vCore. Now, what are the differences between the two? And again, just to keep it simple, you will go with the database transactional unit if you want to keep the thing simple from the purchasing point of view, because these are pre-configured bundle. So DTU is a pre-configured bundle with specific amount of CPU, RAM, and storage. vCore gives you the flexibility. So say if you want to deploy a database which requires certain amount of RAM, you need a say 5 gig of storage, and 2 months down the line you need to go with 10 gig or 20 gig or 1 terabyte. You have the flexibility of moving that up and down. Even in DTUs, that you can also go with from one tier to another one, but that's more on a pre-configured. But vCore you can start with, maybe a lower database, and you can move up and down depending upon the scenario. That's another difference between, or the point to keep in mind when it comes to choosing between DTUs or vCore. Now another thing is that in case you are in a scenario in which you have already on-prem infrastructure, you already have on-prem database, right? And if you have software assurance with that, then in that case you will 99.9% of the time, or I would say 100% of the time, we're going to go with a vCore, because you'll get hybrid benefit, and there is a significant amount of saving from the licensing point of view, because as I said, the licensing is all part of that, whether you use DTU vCore. But in case you have on-prem SA on SQL licensing, you will go with a vCore, because with DTU there is no option of porting that SQL licensing. So in that case, you will go with a vCore. The thing to maybe point to consider to choose between DTUs and vCore, because you get a hybrid benefit with vCore and not with DTU. Another thing is that there is also service tier that will come across, and this applies for both single database in Elastic Pool, which is named basic, standard, and premium. And depending again what kind of compute your application or your database wants, there are three options available. And if I remember correctly, a basic single database will have a max storage of 2 gig, and under most of the scenarios you will use basic service tier for test and dev kind of environment. If you go to standard, the max storage available is 1 TB. That will also depend upon what version of standard you're using. You can go from S0, S1 all the way up. For the first 4 standard option is 250 gig, and anything underneath that start with 250 gig, and you can go and expand up to 1 terabyte. So that's the max in standard. Whereas in premium, the maximum database you can go is 4 terabyte. That's the max database you can go. And if I remember, the first 3 options like P0, P1, and P2 you start from 500 gig, and anything underneath that you can obviously go increment and go up to 4 terabytes. So these are 3 service tier available: basic, standard, and premium. So just to summarize, single database in Elastic Pool, you have 2 purchasing model: DTUs and vCore. It will be eDTU specifically for Elastic Pool or Elastic Database Transactional Unit. It is nothing but a combination of your processing power, RAM, storage, IOPS, throughputs, those kind of stuff. which one you to choose from. I gave you the explain you the differences. If you are into hybrid benefit category, if you have software insurance on-prem, you prefer to go with a vCore. If you want pre-configured bundle, you want on specific pricing every month, you want to go with the DTU option. And there is also a lot of tools available that you can download and run on-prem to find out what or how much database transactional unit I need for my on-prem in case that's the way you want to go for. Another thing that might come into play is, as I said, most these things are similar for both single database and elastic pool. But elastic pool, why you will choose elastic pool over single database? Now, single database, obviously, as I said, is that you get one database, and your application or whatever will use that. When it comes to elastic pool, you have a pool of databases in this, right? So you know that a lot of SaaS application or SaaS developer, they use multiple databases, and what happens is that in most of the cases, in case your application requires say 1 gig or 1.2 gigahertz of processing power, 1 gig of storage, the chances are that you will over provision or you end up over provisioning those resources because you don't want your application to suffer, and you're paying for the resources which you're not consuming. Now, what Elastic Pool will allow you to do is it will allow you to pool these resources in an elastic pool. So, say for example, during certain amount of time, if I have these four databases, right, 1, 2, 3, and 4, one database number one doesn't require that much resources, and two during certain amount of time or there's a peak will require more than one, then those resources are automatically provisioned for you because you have provision elastic pool. So those are dedicated for that. But as you know that you are charged for how these resources are consumed, so it will be charged accordingly. But I hope the point is clear, that even if you are deploying your SaaS application requires in a regular way, you end up deploying resources which are more than what you require because you're not sure during what time of the year or specific time your database or your application will require those resources. But with Elastic Pool, everything is automatically managed by Azure in the backend for you. So in this case, the example that I gave you, the database 2 will be automatically provisioned during those peak hours, and those resources will be automatically taken from the databases which doesn't require those resources during that specific time. So that's another good thing, that you will choose Elastic Pool in those scenarios as compared to the single database. Okay. So the third option, and which is one of the newest option, is manage instance, uh, which is the newest addition when it comes to databases service. And the reason why Microsoft brought this manage instance, because I'm just going to touch upon the compliance perspective. So when we talk about cloud infrastructure, we know that we don't have access to these data centers, and when we are talking about or asking these government or the companies which are highly regulated from the compliance perspective, they're always skeptical because when we talk about deploying these databases, these resources are shared or these storages are shared by other companies. So a company A might have the database on the same storage on which the company B is, and this is a big no-no for regulated companies or regulated industries like banking, government, and all. So they want dedicated resource. So that is what managed instance is the answer for. When you deploy these services within managed instances, that storage is dedicated for you. And if I remember correctly, these are three for high availability that is provisioned for you. So the company A will not have access to company B in case you want to deploy that within managed instance. But for the purchasing model, the difference between single database, elastic pool, and managed instance is that there is no DTU option. There is only vCore option. And quite understandably, as I said, uh, if you have on-prem infrastructure, if you have on-prem SQL licensing with the software assurance, you can take benefit of you can take hybrid benefit. There's a significant amount of saving for you. And you have vCore, and very similar to single database in Elastic Pool, into the service tier you can choose from Gen 4 and Gen 5, and you have general purpose, and you have business critical. And again, which one you choose, it will depend upon the scenario, but they have specific amount of storage, RAM, compute, IOPS, those kind of things. So general purpose, this has a Intel Haswell processor E5. The business critical, they have Intel Broadwell with hyperthreading. But two service tier, generation 4, generation 5, you can choose from general purpose to business critical. Generally, the vCore, one vCore translates into one physical CPU that will be dedicated for you. So depending upon what kind of power your application need, you can choose from managed instance. But from the compliance perspective, these are dedicated resources for you. The storage is not shared by other companies for you. So that's very similar to the vCore option, which is there in single database as well as Elastic Pool. They also have the generation 4 as well as generation 5, same thing, and they have also Intel Haswell and Intel Broadwell. Now there are also some other things that will come into play in the managed instance. Why you want to choose a managed instance over single database or Elastic Pool. But just to touch briefly into this one, managed instance has all those capabilities. So say, for example, if you want the SQL Server agent, that is there. If you want database mail, you get in managed instance. Also, if you want cross database query, that is also there. Now these three options and also some of the other ones, that's not there in single database in Elastic Pool. And therefore when we talk about lift and shift, in case your application has dependency on these three requirements, you might need to choose a managed instance. But in case not, you can go single database in Elastic Pool. And actually Microsoft has made it easier. You can run an application based on which it will tell you, you want to choose between single, Elastic, or managed instance, and you can go accordingly. But just from the purchasing model, as I said, that you have two options. You can go with the IS model in the SQL, or you can go with the PaaS or database as service model, in which you have three options: single, Elastic, and managed instance. And in single Elastic, you can choose from database transactional unit and vCore. And in managed instance, you only have the vCore option. So these are the some things that you need to consider. So let me just go to the pricing calculator and just see the things that I talked about, if it is there or not. So let me just move to pricing calculator, and this is generally available. You can go, and I'm under the featured, and if I go to virtual machine and open this and choose my region operating system, and under the type you see I have the SQL Server, and under the licensing, depending upon what my needs are, I can choose enterprise, standard, and web, and then what kind of compute power I want. So depending upon my application, I can choose from all these options, and whatever the price that you will see here, that will include the SQL licensing cost as well as the compute cost for this machine. So that will fall under the SQL IS model. And as I said again, you're responsible for everything. If you want high availability, you need to deploy this in availability set. So you need to keep that in mind. But if I want to go database as a service, I can go to database as a service and pick Azure SQL database and go to view, choose my region, and under the type I have single, elastic, and manage instance. If I pick single, I have the option purchasing model vCore and DTU. And same thing for the elastic pool. I have DTU and vCore model option available too. And if I choose the vCore option, both for single database and elastic pool, then I have general purpose business critical, Gen 4, Gen 5, and the instances will depend upon that. So that's single database and elastic pool. And if I go to the manage instance, you see I only have the vCore option. I don't have any database transactional unit option in this. And I have service tier, general purpose, and business critical to choose from. I have generation 4, generation 5. I said it's Intel Haswell and Intel Broadwell, so compute power. And obviously there's a limitation of how much storage minimum and maximum you can go, which you can go through on the Microsoft documentation, right? So these are some of the options that you need to keep in mind when trying to price out SQL in Azure. I hope this video was useful and clear some of the doubts which are there in the community on which option to choose from. Obviously, there will be certain other scenarios, some other points which will come into play when we talk about deploying SQL Server in Azure. But I hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.